Yeah, we met some years ago, and I was so interested to hear someone else that knew about myelin and was interested in that. So tell us, how did you start Myelin Leadership? And first, how did you come on the name?
Well, it's really interesting. I've always been in the leadership development business. I've been doing that for over 30 years. But a dozen years ago, I heard about this field called neuro leadership, which teaches people how their brains work and how do you apply that to leading yourself and other people. So I was certified by the Neuro Leadership Institute, which is, gives fairly complex neuro concepts. And my job was then to kind of translate those into layman terms. But what I did after the course, when I'm up north, so I go down to Florida like everybody else, like snowbirds, right? And everybody was reading books on the beaches, murder mysteries and romance novels. Well, I brought 6 books on the brain,
That's what
and
I
and
do.
I'm sure. And that's what really got me excited about this and was the motivator to start developing coaching processes and leadership programs. And
Mhm.
the name myelin was just a natural, right? The connection, the brain wiring, because ultimately in the process, we're trying to build new brain wiring to take over from the old one. So myelin just seemed like a natural.
Okay, great. So that's what we're both interested in, is how to build new wiring to take over from the old wiring. I'm curious, like I never read any mention of myelin anymore and myelination. And I have been very sad to discover that because of there were animal rights activists that made terrorist attacks on people who did monkey research about 20 years ago. And because of that, not only did the monkey research stop, but results that were based on monkey research were withdrawn. And I think this is why we don't hear about it. I think it's tragic. But if you hear more about myelin and myelination, I'd love to know more about it, because people who write to me are often looking for a fast, easy answer. And what pill can I take, or what supplement can I take to give me more myelin? So I'd be happy to hear, in the future if you if you come across that. But right now, I'm happy for my listeners to know that you're not on the fast, easy path, and you're looking to help people do exactly like me, is find the early pathways before, to see how deep they are, and then build new ones with repetition, right?
Absolutely. And Loretta, I so relate to what you just said because I have lots of clients that said, even give me a leadership workshop in half a day because I want to transform my leadership team. And I mean, the message has to get out there. That's not how the brain works. Much like you're not going to pick up a guitar, play it a few times in a month, and become a great guitar player, right? It takes a lot of time to build the myelin and the synaptic connections in the brain to do that. And it's the same thing with learning. So that's why part of my coaching processes and leadership development workshops, no, this is over time because that's how the human brain works. And there's no quick fixes to any of this stuff. And I think that's such an important message to get out there. It just isn't easy. It's not fast and easy. It just isn't.
Yes. And yet you have a 10-week program. And I like that because, I often talk about 6 to 8 weeks. That's the amount of time that we can sustain our excitement, sort of like people training for a marathon or something. So tell us about your 10-week program.
Well, great. So what we do is the first part of it, if you will, the first 3 sessions are really educational sessions because people think that they're in control of their brains, and we know that's just not true. In fact, everybody thinks that their brains always work in their best interest, and we know that's not true. And to your wonderful work, everybody thinks that the brain's there to help us thrive or be happy. And we know that no, it's there to help us survive. So we educate them as much as possible as a background. And then sessions 4 to 6, we actually get people to tell their stories. The first one from childhood, then adolescent years, and then adult years. And we do it through visuals because people might think, well, it's hard for me to remember stories before the age of 10. Or they'll tell a story, but it's based on the rational brain, not on emotion. So we use pictures to help wake up the emotions in people and the memories. And so they start to tell their stories. And then in session 7, we then do a review because people identify the deceptive brain messages that are subconsciously embedded in their brains, usually from childhood years. And they also understand the coping mechanisms they used when they were 6, 7, or 8. For example, becoming a bully or a people pleaser or an avoider. But then
Can I
what
just ask, so do you
sure.
have people who are capable of seeing that they were the bully?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
It's through that story. There's no question about it, because what we do is we help them make links between those subconsciously embedded messages and the coping mechanisms and maladaptive behaviors that they want to change in adulthood. So they might be the bully in the boardroom, right? And they don't understand it. And when we go back so that they understand their story, that no, this is actually without you being aware of it, this is wired in your brain, which is why you're acting like a bully,
Yeah, because
right?
most people always see themselves as the victim. And of course, it's often said, that the person who bullies has been bullied, and yet they often still see themselves as the victim, even as they're bullying. So, how do you get the person to see the truth?
Well, it really is in their real life story. Because after they tell their story, after several sessions or whatever, then we do a review. Well, what did you learn? What are your deceptive brain messages, such as, well, I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy of love. I'm a loser. Those kinds of things that they don't realize are embedded there. So a coping mechanism by taking control is bullying. So we get them to understand that, and that is part of how your brain is wired, right? Which is why that bullying behavior is evident, in this case, in the boardroom or wherever it is. So I think it's just by understanding and come to terms with your story
Mhm.
that you start to understand, and educating people how their brains work. Now you start to make links between what really is subconsciously buried in your brain and your adult behavior.
Great. So I'm curious though, like let's say this person has a coping mechanism that they're not really proud of. Do you lead them to see it themselves, or do you have to tell them?
I think, Loretta, it's case by case. By this session 7, there some people, the ahas go off and they make the links themselves. In other cases, I have to guide them, sometimes even challenge them to say, no, no, let's go
Yes.
back to your story and right, let's reflect on that. And it's through that reflection process that they start to make the links and say, wow, I never thought about that.
Yeah, that's great because in my new book, Why You're Unhappy, in chapter 7 is about therapy. And I talk about the fact, the subtitle of the book is Biology versus Politics. So the politics of therapy is that people often quit once you tell them something that doesn't make them feel good about themselves. So this is very strategic that you have pre-committed them to a particular timeline and that you don't let them just waste the whole time with this glorified illusion that it doesn't really serve them in the long run. So good for
And
you.
I think, to just Loretta, if I may, like a lot of people I work with, presidents, CEOs, and they're left brain. So when they find out that the core of what we're doing is actually science, it's neuroscience, that resonates with them because I can give them books to read, YouTube videos on it, and they often engage with those. And wow, this is science based, and that clicks with them, right? This isn't. I mean, a lot of them look at psychology as fluff, which it isn't, but that's how they take a look at. But if you can say this is based on hard scientific evidence, then that seems to register with them.
So you said that you use visual stimuli. So can you give us some examples?
Yes, well, so what we basically do, we have special photographs that I take, and they're very evocative. So, for example, there's one photograph that I have. It's really quite something. It's two men who are sitting down, and from their kind of stomach up, they're in a suit, but from their bottom down, they're in their underwear, wearing boots, if you will. And so people who take a look at that photo, and everybody interprets it differently, but they might get very uncomfortable, or they might laugh, or it might click with them. And somebody might say, that's how I feel at the office. I feel the real me is the
Oh,
bottom, right? Whereas the top of it is I feel constrained, like in a tie, it's not the real me. So by virtue of the photograph, it unlocks something in the brain that gets them to talk about that subject. And you follow up to say, well, do you feel constrained at the office? And then they start saying yes. And it's the photograph that got them on that path and safe to talk about it.
okay. I have, by coincidence, I was just organizing some files today and found a photo of myself on the toilet at 18 months old. Um,
Oh,
it doesn't show below the waist. You see the toilet in the background, though. And I sent it to my daughter because she's now in the potty training stage with her kid.
it's
So shows that we all go through this, and my mother went through it with me, right? Um,
yes.
so, but I bet that would be an evocative photo if you want it.
It will, and
Um,
it might, and by the way, what a lot of psychologists do today, when their patients won't or clients won't open up to them, they get them to bring their personal photo albums in, and they talk through the photo. So your photo might be again a springboard to talk about something else.
yeah. So, what about people who tell you that they just don't remember their childhood?
Well, that is very common, and I found that the more that they blocked out their childhood before the age of 10, the more that there's a lot that's going on, right? So, the use of the photographs are very, very helpful because they kind of fire up, if you will, the neurons in the memory part of the brain, the hippocampus, and on, and the anterior cingulate cortex, which is related to memory as well as emotion. So that's a huge purpose of the photos, is to help them, right? So that the photos, they go back to a memory from childhood, and that gets them talking about, oh yeah, my dad didn't attend baseball practice, and that was really hard on me. And they had totally forgotten about it. But through the photo, they're able to talk to that story.
Hmm. So it's funny that you say that because so we hear so much about trauma today, and I felt that it sort of oversimplifies the word because then you are focused on like some people's trauma, it counts more than other people's trauma, but then it makes people um, feel like victims when really we just need to accept the fact that children feel weak and we have to learn to feel strong. It's natural to feel weak. When you're young, you are weak, and then you have to build the skill of strength. So one person might say, well, you're lucky you even got to go to baseball practice. But then, I think in those days, parents didn't have to go to their kids' baseball practice. That's the
Mhm.
kids should be there for their own. So why would you see that as traumatic? Is because someone else put the idea in your head that they got a, you're comparing what they got to what you got. I don't know. I don't know how
No,
you
you're absolutely right. And part of the education part of the process is basically to say, hey, when you were two, three, four, five, or six, you were totally dependent on your parents for survival. So your deceptive brain messages and coping mechanisms are largely due to that and other things, but certainly that parental influence is really key. So the fact that those behaviors have um, um, sustained themselves in adulthood, go back and think that, you know what, those coping mechanisms like avoiding people pleasing, bullying, or whatever, were actually your brain's survival instincts at the time that became hardwired in your brain into adulthood. You no longer need those coping mechanisms like bullying. They worked when you were 4, 5, 6. They're not working for you now. So now we can help reprogram your brain to get that, not to get rid of, but to diminish those deceptive messages and build new brain wiring, which is much more positive and self-fulfilling.